The Serpent Lord. I don't remember ever spending time with my father's family, save for a few rare occasions. When I was 19, we traveled to Mexico City. One of his sisters had passed away. We left Guadalajara before dawn. The journey was long. My father drove almost the entire way without playing music. Dawn caught up with us near Toluca, amid low clouds and the smell of smoke. I didn't talk much, and neither did my parents. All you could hear was the hum of the engine, and if you passed your hand over the condensation on the window, you could see the old billboards along the highway. This is a true story. A couple vanished without a trace in the mountains of Chiapas, Mexico. The wife returned alone 6 months later, carrying a horrific secret that no one dared believe. I am the only relative who knows the truth. My aunt literally broke apart. From inside her body, hundreds of living snakes poured out, and now something is moving beneath my skin. The funeral wasn't held in a house or a funeral home, but at a private cemetery in the Ecatepec area. Private was just a way of saying there was a fence and a guard booth at the entrance, but inside it still felt like a public cemetery. The graves were packed together, some with faded inscriptions, and the walkways were made of loose dirt. There were white tents assembled with metal pipes and folding chairs, withered flower arrangements, and a thick smell of damp earth mixed with cheap perfume. I recognized a few faces, but most were strangers to me. My father's family is numerous. It was obvious that many hadn't seen each other in years. People talking loudly, crying and embracing, passing around cups of lukewarm coffee or offering sweet bread without looking each other in the eye. My father went to talk with his siblings, and I stayed outside. I wandered for a while among the new gravestones, looking for a place where I could smoke without being seen. Behind a statue of the Virgin Mary, partially covered with a blue tarp, I found two girls about my age. They were also hiding, doing the same thing I was. "They won't let you smoke here," one said with a tired smile. "That's why I'm hiding," I replied. We chatted briefly, and it turned out they were my cousins. One was named Elena, the other Camila. I had never seen them before. They told me they were the daughters of another of my father's sisters, one who lived in Querétaro. They both spoke softly, as if they didn't want anyone to hear them. From the moment we were notified of my aunt's death until that moment, I hadn't had the courage to satisfy my curiosity and ask what had happened to her. It wasn't necessary. We were heading back to the main tent when they realized I didn't know how she had died. "They didn't tell you anything?" Elena asked. I shook my head. "Come on, let's go over there so we can tell you." We crossed a dirt path until we reached the end of the tents and sat on a low wall that separated the cemetery from a kind of vacant lot full of dry grass. From there we could see the stalls selling funeral wreaths at the entrance and a tarp where someone was frying huaraches. The air smelled of grease and stagnant puddles. I think what I'm about to tell you is the most disturbing story I've heard in a long time. Camilla began, her eyes lighting up with a strange gleam. Our Aunt Isabella had a lot of marital problems, but she didn't tell anyone. In front of others, she and her husband Miguel seemed very much in love. They were the kind of people who kept arguments for private spaces, but they had just reached a stage in their relationship where they realized they weren't compatible, though they wanted to overcome those differences because they had a 2-year-old girl and a 6-year-old girl. When they mentioned them, they pointed to two girls sitting near a large, white-painted cross, looking at the ground with blank expressions, not really understanding what they were doing there. The older one, a girl with large brown eyes, was comforting her sister, while adults cried around them. Isabella suggested marriage counseling. Miguel told her he wasn't ready to talk about their problems with a stranger. She paused, looking into the distance as if recalling details from a story that had been told and retold. A heavy atmosphere descended. And then somehow they came across the advice of a friend. A friend of Isabella's told her about spiritual retreats. She said that she herself had gone with her husband and it had changed their lives. It was in a village in the Sierra of Chiapas. To get there, you had to take a bus to a place called Nuevo Ejido, though that wasn't its real name, and then continue on horseback along a stone path between hills covered in fog. Elena continued, her voice dropping. They said that as you went higher, the sound of the forest would gradually fade away. Birds stopped singing, insects disappeared. Only the wind and the rustling of trees remained. The retreat would be held in an old coffee plantation abandoned since the 1970s. It had been restored for spiritual purposes. There would be no electricity or phone signal. Upon arrival, the organizers would ask you to leave any metal objects, cell phones, watches, rings, even belt buckles. They said that some electronic devices interrupted the natural energy of the place. They were told they would sleep in shared rooms on wooden cots covered with thick blankets that smelled of dampness. They would eat unsalted bread, herbal broths, and fermented fruits. During the day, they would walk in silence. At night, they would gather in the main room of the hacienda, a vast space with walls covered in moss and roots descending from the ceiling. In the center, they would place a candle inside a clay bowl, and around it figures carved in wood. Not saints, though they looked like them. They had no faces. They said they represented the ancient mother who existed before man, before the church, before the name of God. The smell of damp earth and mildew seemed to intensify as she spoke. I felt a chill run down my spine despite the warm day. This wasn't just a story about getting lost in the woods. That's what was planned, Camilla said, interrupting her sister. But they never reached the retreat site. Isabella and Miguel got lost on the way. They had hired a man from the nearest village to guide them. He promised them the journey would be worth it, that they would see landscapes that looked painted, that up there the air was so clean that even voices echoed differently. And at first it was like that. They climbed up trails between humid coffee plantations with ravines covered in ferns and huge tree trunks crossing the path like natural bridges. But after a while, the landscape became repetitive. Everything looked the same: tall trees, dark trunks, the same murmur of water running between stones and a fog that didn't allow them to see beyond a few meters. It was about 11 in the morning, but it seemed much earlier or much later because the sun was still behind hundreds of layers of clouds, fog, and mist. The air was cold and saturated with humidity. Each time the wind blew, the branches shook and dropped drops of dew on them. Camilla paused to take a drag on her cigarette, and I realized I had been completely drawn into the story. A sense of unease began to creep into my mind. The guide walked ahead with a machete in hand, clearing the way. He had warned them before setting out that they should be careful of snakes, which could scare the horses, but they should not harm them because that was forbidden up there. Miguel laughed, thinking it was just a common ecological advice. "Don't kill wildlife," Elena said. He didn't know that in Chiapas, in villages deep in the mountains, snakes aren't just animals. Although it was quite hot, I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't just an ordinary story about getting lost in the forest. Elena continued, her voice lowering to a whisper. The guide also told them there were ravines, and they shouldn't leave the trail. They didn't know exactly when they lost the guide. First they thought he had gone too far ahead, then that he had left the path to check on something. The fact was that when they realized it, he was no longer there. They called out to him several times, but there was no response. They continued walking for a stretch, believing they would catch up with him until the path simply ended. The trail dissolved among the roots as if it had never existed. They tried to go back to follow the tracks of the guide's horse, but they couldn't. The horses began to tire, or perhaps they were hungry. They didn't know. They only noticed that they no longer wanted to continue. They snorted, moved their legs without conviction, suddenly stopped. The air had become thicker and the forest denser. They were scared. When they decided to dismount to orient themselves between the trees, they saw a clearing. From the top of the hill, they could make out some houses, just gray blurs in the fog. There were no lights, but the shapes were there, motionless, real. They didn't know how far away they were, but it was all they had. So to avoid spending the night in the open, they at least knew which way they should head. Luckily, one of the horses had a machete tied to its saddle. Miguel took it and began using it to make his way through the branches, cutting ferns and thin trunks, because there was no trail to the village. It took them about 40 minutes to reach the village. It wasn't far, but the horses were exhausted. They moved slowly, stumbling on the stones along the way, as if their legs bent with each step. The air felt increasingly colder, and by that time they no longer heard birds or insects, only the rustle of leaves and the thud of the machete against branches as they descended. All three of us fell silent for a moment, and I noticed that many others had left the funeral. Only the closest relatives remained by the coffin, and the smell of incense hung heavily in the air. When they finally arrived, they saw it wasn't a tourist spot far from it. There were no hostels, no eateries, no markets. The houses were scattered, some with lights, others completely dark. Still, it didn't seem like an abandoned village. There were stray dogs sleeping on the tall grass, wrapped up in themselves. Occasionally, you could hear a distant bark or the sound of a door closing. They walked along the main street, not knowing exactly where to go. The facades were old, with moldy paint-wooden doors and sheet metal roofs held down with stones. They felt gazes from the cracks from barely open windows. It wasn't friendly curiosity, but rather that kind of silent, tense observation that seems to measure every movement. "I wonder if they've never seen anyone on horseback," Miguel said, trying to break the silence. They continued to the plaza. The ground was made of irregular stone, and in the center was a metal kiosk painted green, rusted at the bases. They dismounted with legs sore from riding too long. The air smelled of cold earth and wet wood. They didn't think it necessary to tie up the horses. The animals barely moved. But as soon as they sat on the steps of the kiosk, the horses became restless and within seconds ran off in opposite directions, disappearing into the narrow and poorly lit streets. Elena smiled sadly. Knowing our Aunt Isabella, she probably thought, "Bad luck, they're going to make us pay for the horses." They tried to call the guide, but there was no way. They took out their phones and confirmed that there was no signal there either. Their last bit of battery was used up trying to call unsuccessfully. They looked at each other without saying anything, their bodies trembling, not knowing if it was from the cold or from fear. Camilla sighed and glanced at her watch. "The story is actually much longer, but I think the funeral is ending. Let's go back before someone notices we've disappeared. We can talk more on the way back." As we returned to the family, I felt a strange anxiety, as if I had just been introduced to a story I wasn't sure I wanted to hear all of. Yet I couldn't deny that I was captivated. "Let us exchange phone numbers," I said to Elena and Camilla. "I want to hear the rest of the story." Elena smiled a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Sure, but I have to warn you, once you know what happened to Aunt Isabella and Miguel, you'll never look at meat pies the same way again." I shuddered without understanding why. 2 weeks after the funeral, I still couldn't stop thinking about Isabella and Miguel's story. I had searched the internet for mysterious villages in Chiapas, for beliefs related to snakes, for people missing in the Sierra Mountains, but found nothing specific that resembled the story Elena and Camila had told me. That night I received a message from Camila. "We need to talk. I have a part of the diary that we didn't tell you about. Can you come to my place tomorrow night?" I agreed, although part of me didn't want to know more. The address she gave me was a small apartment in the Condesa neighborhood, a trendy area with tall trees and cafes on every corner. When I arrived, Elena was already there, sitting on a couch near the window, smoking. "Thanks for coming," Camilla said as she opened the door. "We weren't sure you'd want to know more after hearing the first part." "I'm not sure I do," I admitted, but I also can't stop thinking about it. It's that kind of story, Elena said. It stays with you, like a stone in your shoe. Or like a snake in the bed sheets, Camila added, laughing tensely. They invited me to sit down, and Camila handed me a glass of tequila. You'll need this, she said. All right, I said, after taking a large sip, feeling the liquor burn my throat. You said you have a part of the diary you haven't told me about. Yes, Elena said. The part we told you is the part that Isabella shared with the family, the part everyone knows. But there's another part, a part she kept secret until her last days. She gave it to our mother in a sealed envelope with the promise that she wouldn't read it until after she was gone. And what does it say? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. It talks about what really happened inside the temple, Camilla said, her voice dropping to a whisper. About what happened to Miguel? About the Lord of the Serpents? And about what happened to Isabella after she returned? Elena took a bundle of crumpled papers from her bag, tied with a string. This isn't the original diary, she explained. These are copies our mother made. She burned the original after reading it. Burned it? I asked, surprised. Why, you'll understand, Camilla said, handing me the papers. At first, psychologists told us it was just hallucinations caused by severe trauma stories her mind created to cope with losing her husband in the remote mountains. But the bloodstains on the bedsheets and what I just saw moving under my skin are not hallucinations. As I read the first lines of Isabella's diary, a sense of dread washed over me. The handwriting was a mess of small, hurried scrawls, sometimes hard to read, with symbols and sketched drawings in the margins. It began without preamble, as if it were part of a longer story that had started elsewhere. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that all of this, the story about the village, about the Lord of the Serpents, about what happened to Isabella and Miguel, was just a cruel joke, a ghost story told too well. But I couldn't shake the feeling of movement in my stomach, a coiling and slithering that seemed to grow stronger with each hour. I told myself it was stress or some kind of psychological reaction to a horrifying story. Or maybe I had eaten something that had gone bad. But a small part of me knew it wasn't any of those things. A small part of me knew that what Elena and Camilla had said was true. I must have fallen asleep at some point, because when I woke up it was morning. I staggered into the bathroom, feeling as if I'd been drinking all night. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. My face was pale, my eyes bloodshot, but worst of all was my skin. It was stretched oddly, as if something underneath was pushing outward. The Lord of Serpents never forgives, and he never forgets. A week after the funeral, I contacted Elena and Camilla. We decided to meet at a coffee shop in Coyoacán, a vibrant neighborhood in southern Mexico City. I don't know why, but the death of an aunt I barely knew and the unfinished story about the strange village in Chiapas had been haunting my mind. When I arrived, they were already there, sitting in a far corner, Elena rolling a cigarette and Camila fidgeting with her coffee cup. I didn't think you'd come, Camila said as I sat down. Why would you think that? Most people don't want to hear stories like this, Elena explained, lighting her cigarette. Or they listen but think we're exaggerating or lying. I don't think you're lying, I said, although a part of me was still skeptical. How do you know all these details? Did Gabriella tell you everything? They exchanged a look. I'll get straight to the point, Camilla said. Gabriella left a diary. After she died, our mother found it while cleaning out her apartment. It was like a kind of therapy journal. Her psychologist had told her to write down what happened as part of the healing process. It was a thick notebook, handwritten in black ink with small hurried writing. There were parts that were wet and smudged, as if she had cried while writing. And she wrote about everything that happened in that village, most of it, Elena said. Some pages are missing. We think she tore them out. Perhaps the worst parts. Or something she didn't want anyone to read, Camilla added, her voice dropping. But we tried to piece everything together between what was written in the diary and what Gabriella told our mother in the months before she left us. Camila took a sip of her coffee and continued the story from where we had left off. Gabriela and Javier fell asleep there, leaning against each other, shivering with empty stomachs and numb legs. The plaza was silent, and throughout the night no one approached them. She woke up the next day with a horrible feeling in her stomach, as if an acid bubble had formed and burst inside her from so much hunger. She opened her eyes and saw people watching them. "Where are you from? What are you doing here?" a woman asked. "Did you ask the Lord of the Serpents for permission to stay and sleep?" That was the first time they heard mention of the Lord of the Serpents, and one of many before they understood what the people were talking about, or what they were referring to when they said that. The truth was that the place was full of snakes. They had seen them all along the way, coiled on stones crossing paths, and even more in the valley where the village was located. Javier began to tell them what had happened to them, how they had gotten lost, how the guide disappeared, how the horses got scared and ran away. Gabriela interrupted him, occasionally adding dramatic details. The people listened in silence. Then a woman, the oldest in the group, told them they couldn't stay, that there was no one to receive them or give them food. When the horses ran away, they also took some of their belongings. Javier had been carrying all the money, and it had gone with the saddlebags. He was left with only the machete in his hand. Gabriela luckily had brought her wallet down. She had some cash in it. Showing a 500 peso bill to a woman passing by with a shopping bag, Gabriela asked if she could make them something to eat. The woman stopped, looked them up and down, and said yes, but first she had to stop by the temple. Elena took a sip of water from her glass. Gabriela's diary describes the village in extreme detail, as if she was afraid that if she didn't write down every minute detail, no one would believe her. Or perhaps she was afraid she would forget, that the memory would dissolve like a dream. The woman led them through narrow streets covered in fog. At that hour the sun was just a white blur behind the clouds. The air smelled of burning wood. The walls of most houses were covered with moss, with doors tightly shut. Out of 10 houses, 7 seemed empty. There were no radios, no voices, no roosters. Just the dull sound of their footsteps on the damp earth and the clinking of the machete hanging from the belt. The temple was at the far end of the village, set into a low hill. It was a complex structure, much more elaborate than the houses in the village, and oddly without bells. In front of the facade were many snakes of different sizes and colors. Some were coiled on cold stones. Others climbed up tree trunks or slid between piles of firewood and empty jugs that people left there as offerings. Before embarking on that adventure, Gabriela had watched several YouTube videos about the dangers of the Sierra, and among so many suggestions, one explained how to identify venomous snakes. And there at the temple, she immediately recognized some of the ones that were and weren't poisonous. I felt a chill run down my spine as Camila continued the story, her voice dropping to a whisper. The woman told them that if they didn't want to go in, it was fine, but if they did, they had to take their boots off. "We'll wait here," Gabriela said, clutching her stomach when her guts rumbled. They waited outside. The air was heavy, motionless. Gabriela saw what happened from the outside. The woman with the shopping bag knelt in front of a dark circle drawn on the ground, made with obsidian fragments that gleamed under the gray light of day. She opened the bags she had brought and emptied their contents in front of the stone. Meat, easily about 5 kilograms. Raw pieces still wet, which fell with a heavy thud onto the earth. Suddenly something shook in the ground like a brief earthquake, and all the snakes moved at the same time. They slid into the cracks, the holes beneath the stones between the vegetation. At first, Gabriela thought the meat was for the snakes, that they would soon come back out of their hiding places. But that's not what happened. The woman knelt down and began to pray. It wasn't a prayer like those in church. The words had no meaning. They were sounds, dragged syllables, guttural, spoken between whispers and sighs. The temple outside had become empty of snakes. Then something began to rise in front of the woman. At first it looked like a shadow, then a more defined form, like a human figure but made of movement. Gabriella didn't breathe but pulsed as if the entire body was formed of living things. It was a statue made of snakes. The scales intertwined, changed places, slid over each other. Where there should have been stone, there were reptile bodies writhing. Where there should have been eyes, there were blinking hollows. The woman continued, praying fearlessly, as if she knew what she was doing. Gabriella, on the contrary, stood motionless, watching from the door, holding her breath, trying to convince herself that it was an illusion, an effect of light or fog filtering through the cracks in the roof, but it wasn't. The figure slowly turned and for an instant only seemed to look directly at her. Of course, that must be the Lord of the Serpents. Elena placed a hand on my arm, startling me. "Are you cold? I think we should go inside." "No, continue," I said. "I want to hear the rest." Camilla smiled faintly and continued. "When the woman left the temple, the lights inside went out completely, allowing that figure to merge with the darkness. The neighbor came out with the empty bag, walking slowly, and they who thought she was going to get food from there to cook for them stood looking at her, not knowing what to say. 'Don't be rude,' she told them. 'Show respect.' She put her hand to Gabriella's ear and, without asking permission, snatched an earring. From Javier, she unfastened a button from his shirt. Then she placed them beside the entrance to the temple. She said a few words softly and began to walk, expecting Gabriella and Javier to follow. Her house wasn't far. They walked about 2 blocks, one long and one short. The streets were still shrouded in fog. Nothing could be heard, not even dogs. When they arrived, the woman invited them into a patio where there was a stone stove. She indicated that they should sit on old chairs that creaked when moved and began to cook. Javier observed her attentively. At one point, a comment escaped him. "Just vegetables for us, huh? No meat. That meat you went to throw at the temple, better you should have given it to us." The woman stopped and looked at him. "No one eats meat here," she said. "Only the Lord." She brought her hand to her forehead and pointed toward the temple, as if making the sign of the cross, but for another god. The coffee shop was starting to get crowded, and the noise of conversations and the clinking of cups created a background sound that I was grateful for. Elena and Camilla's story was making me feel uncomfortable, as if I were looking through a door that I wasn't sure I wanted to open. The meal filled their stomachs, quelled their hunger, and in the situation they were in, that was more than enough. Still, Gabriella made a joke, trying to lighten the fear. "For what we paid and the lack of protein, I'd give this place 1 star on Google Maps," she said, laughing to herself, as if still believing they were on a tour of vacation in the middle of an adventure that would bring them closer together as a couple. But they were isolated. They didn't know where they were or how much time had passed since they had gotten lost. Moreover, no one wanted them there. They were told they wouldn't be allowed to stay another night, and they hadn't even gone to thank the Lord. When Gabriella asked to use the bathroom, the woman charged her 100 pesos. At that rate, in 2 days they would be out of money for food. Around 6 in the evening, a person arrived whom they hadn't seen during the entire time they had been in the village. They didn't know who he was, but the villagers treated him with a mixture of respect and relief. They talked to him. He seemed to have authority, as if he could make decisions for everyone. He told them that he had no choice but to escort them to the exit of the village, that he wished he could tell them they were welcome whenever they wanted to return, but he didn't want to say goodbye to them with a lie that they should make sure to take the right path and never return. If you think about it, Elena said they made Gabriella and Javier believe they weren't trapped. They gave them to understand that they weren't welcome and they could leave whenever they wanted. But in front of them there was no path, no indication of which way was the next village or the road or the state capital. Just a sign nailed to a post that said, "The Lord of the Serpents does not forgive." It seemed as though it had been placed just for them, because for the next 3 hours, that was all they saw, which kept them circling around the edges of the village as if the forest wouldn't let them leave nor the sign enter. When night fell, and the sounds of the mountains became more aggressive. The wind insects' branches cracking in the darkness, they returned to the center of the village. In the kiosk, people were waiting for them, as if they knew they would return. They offered the first stranger all they had left, about 6,000 pesos. They promised that the next day they would leave, that they just wanted a place to sleep and someone to take them to the city by truck. A man who was accompanied by a woman and 3 children offered them lodging. One was carried by the woman in her arms, another slept on her back in a rebozo, and the third held her by the arm, repeatedly telling her not to let go for any reason. They led Gabriela and Javier to a house a few blocks away and gave them a room that, unlike everything else in the village, was neither damp nor cold. "You could rent this room on Airbnb," Gabriela said, trying to sound lighthearted, but as soon as she said it, she realized it wasn't funny. 6,000 pesos for this tiny room, Javier muttered before falling into a deep sleep. Camila paused to drink some coffee, and I realized I was holding my breath. There was something about to happen. I could feel it. Gabriela was awakened by a scream, then several more. First from the woman of the house, then from the children, and finally from the homeowner, who cursed and ran toward the room. Gabriela didn't understand what was happening or why there were so many people in the room at dawn. It turned out that Javier had woken up a few minutes earlier because he felt something tickling his ankle. He sat up, and in the dim light coming through the window he saw a snake on the bed, one of the venomous ones coiled there, moving slowly between the sheets. He grabbed the machete that he had left beside him just in case, and without thinking, with one slash, he cut off the snake's head. The house shook, the ground trembled. It wasn't the scream that had awakened Gabriela, but the change in the atmosphere. Something around them had reacted instantly, as if with that act he had broken a covenant they didn't know existed. Within minutes, an exalted and angry mob formed outside the house where they were hosted. At 4 a.m, the villagers dragged Javier out into the street. The 3 times Gabriela tried to intervene, she was pushed away forcefully, almost violently. She shouted his name, but no one listened. Windows opened one by one, and suddenly the streets were filled with people. It was as if the entire village had been waiting for this moment. There were more people than they had imagined could live there. Men with machetes, women with candles, barefoot children watching from doorways. All pointed at him, but especially at Javier, who had killed the snake, who, according to them, had disrespected the Lord of the Serpents, and who there in the temple at that moment they were going to judge. The enraged mass surrounded him, shouting, pushing, taking him downhill through the streets of the village toward the temple. Gabriela tried to follow them, but they wouldn't let her. They stopped her at the corner, pushed her back, the last one, the only one not allowed, into the temple. Inside, nothing could be heard happening. Or perhaps the temple was actually farther back, and what she could see was just the entrance. Perhaps behind, deep in the mountain, were the great altar, the altarpieces, and who knows, the chambers of the Lord of the Serpents. The truth is, she never saw a single snake again, not in the temple where she had once seen them gathered, not on the streets, not among the trees, not in the tall grasses. The village was still and above all silent. That day, Gabriela didn't have breakfast. She had no money for such luxuries. Around 3 p.m, she finally saw someone coming out of the temple, a single person out of more than 100 who had entered the temple as if they had nothing more important to do in their homes. That person approached her and offered her something to eat. She told Gabriela that while they were delivering a verdict to her husband, she could stay there on a bench beside the entrance to the temple. The bench was like a bus stop. It had a tin roof and some rusted route signs. But in all the time she was there, she didn't see any buses or vans pass by. She devoured what they gave her without finding flavor. At that point, anything was enough to soothe the hunger which was preventing her from thinking about how to get out of that situation. And with something in her stomach, she kept thinking about the words of the person who had given her the meat pie, while they deliver a verdict to your husband. That meant the trial hadn't ended yet, and with a bit of luck he was still alive. Gabriella stayed to camp outside the temple for an indefinite time, days, weeks, months. The days began to blur together. She only ate once a day, always the same thing, a meat pie that the same woman brought at the same time. Sometimes she thought about what the first woman had said, that in the village no one ate meat, but she was still grateful that at least they were feeding her. Over time, between anxiety and waiting, she began to feel something strange toward that woman. First gratitude, then a kind of devotion. She had spent so many hours not talking to anyone, not seeing anything but the walls of the temple and fog, that she began to love, admire, almost worship her. Elena and Camilla exchanged glances, and I could see the tension in the way they held their shoulders. Gabriella knew that alone without her husband she would never be able to leave that place. Where would she go? How would she get back home? She thought about her daughters all the time, imagining what they might be thinking, whether they believed their parents had gotten lost, or if someone in their family had comforted them. Sometimes she thought she had gone mad, because of all the people she had seen enter the temple. She had never seen anyone else come out except the woman who brought the meat pies. Until one day she realized something. All the houses in the village, or almost all, had entrances to the temple tunnels, passages, as if the entire village were a single structure connected to the same heart. For weeks she asked about the verdict for her husband, but over time she stopped asking. She was afraid they would tell her something she already feared, that they had killed him, buried him, or that his body had burned in a bonfire and his ashes had been scattered on the mountain. The strangest thing was that at the entrance to the temple there was no door. Nothing prevented her from going in, just the warning that she should stay there, and Gabriella obeyed. The day she dared to go in was different. That day they had given her 2 meat pies to eat. For the first time in weeks she felt strength, courage, and above all, energy. So she crossed the entrance. Inside it smelled of dampness, metal, and old earth. The floor was covered with black stones and obsidian fragments. The walls had carved reliefs with forms of intertwined snakes. At the back, barely visible between torches and smoke, was a stained sacrificial stone. There was no one there, but she heard murmurs as if voices were coming from inside the walls. She continued walking, found tunnels, passages that went deeper and deeper into darkness, and there, far away at the bottom, she saw a flickering light. From there came the smell of food. She walked slowly and saw her. It was the woman who brought the meat pies, bent over a stove. Gabriella approached and with a broken voice begged her to take her to see her husband. The woman didn't look up. "That's impossible," she said. "Why, what did you do to him?" "Your husband is no longer with us," she replied. Gabriella stood frozen. "What does that mean? Don't you understand what happened?" she asked. "Do you really not know?" Camilla and Elena looked at me, and I felt a sense of dread rising within me. I knew the answer, but I didn't want to hear it spoken aloud. "They had been feeding him in those meat pies," Camilla said, her voice deep and steady. For some reason at that moment, Gabriella didn't fully understand, or perhaps her mind blocked it because it was too obvious. In that village, no one ate meat, no one at all, only the Lord of the Serpents, and Gabriella had eaten each and every meat pie they had given her. I felt nauseated. "That can't be real," I said. "It's just a horror story, an urban legend." A few days after going into the temple, they put her in a truck along with other people and took her to the city of Chiapas. There, she finally was able to make a rescue call. But before they let her off, she asked the name of the village, imagining it would help with reporting. But those who accompanied her looked at each other and didn't answer. They just started the engine and drove away, leaving her there. The girls had to wait 6 months without their mother, hoping for news. It seemed as if the earth had swallowed them. "The earth swallowed him and she swallowed him," Camilla said, trying to break the tension, but no one laughed. I was finishing hearing that terrifying story and didn't know what to say. "And her, why did she die?" I asked. Elena looked at me expressionlessly. Would you want to continue living knowing you had eaten your husband? I tried to laugh it off, but couldn't. Something about the story felt too real, too visceral. But this is just a story, right? I mean, there's no way this actually happened. Of course it's just a story, Alex, Camilla said, but her eyes didn't match her reassuring tone. Just a horror tale from the mountains of Chiapas. I nodded, relieved, but then noticed something strange. On the floor near my foot, a small black snake slithered by. I blinked and it was gone. When I looked up, both Elena and Camila were watching me intently. Did you see something? Elena asked quietly. No, I lied. Nothing at all. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw snakes, hundreds of them coiling and intertwining to form the shape of a man. And deep in my stomach, I felt something move. The next morning, I woke up drenched in sweat. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Camila and a text message from Elena. We need to talk. There's been a change of plans. Call me as soon as possible. I ignored the message and opened my web browser. I started searching for anything I could find about strange villages in Chiapas, about snake worship, about people missing in the Sierra Mountains. But just as before, I found nothing specific resembling the story Elena and Camila had told me. I spent the day in a half-awake, half-dreaming state trying to make sense of it all. I called my parents hoping they could tell me something about Gabriela and Javier, something to confirm or refute the story. But they were surprised when I asked, telling me they hardly knew Gabriela beyond her name. She and my mother had never been close, and no one in the family had really kept in touch with her until she died. In the evening, the coiling in my stomach became too intense to bear. I ran to the bathroom and threw up, expecting to see a small, black living snake crawl out of me, but there was nothing. Just water, because I hadn't eaten all day. I decided to go to bed early, hoping things would be clearer in the morning. But as soon as I lay down, I received another message from Camila. I know you're scared, so are we, but we don't have much time. Meet us at the bus station tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. We've found someone who knows where the village is. I didn't reply, but I also couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed for hours, listening to the insects outside my window and feeling the movement inside me. And then, in the middle of the night, I woke up from a nightmare, sweating and gasping. In the dream, I had seen Javier, but not the man I remembered from photos at the funeral. Javier in my dream was made of snakes, thousands of snakes coiling and writhing. He opened his mouth to speak, and from it a voice emerged that wasn't his. "He belongs to me," the voice said, deep and gravelly like grinding stones. "He killed one of my children, and in penance he became part of me. And now she belongs to me. She ate him, and in penance she will become part of me. And now you belong to me. You have heard the story, have dreamed of me, and in penance you will become part of me." I woke with a scream on my lips, my entire body trembling. And when I looked down, I saw the skin on my arm moving as if something underneath was pushing outward. I made my decision right then and there. I would meet Elena and Camila at the bus station. I would go with them to the village. I would find the Lord of the Serpents, because if I didn't, I knew what would happen to me. I would end up like Gabriela. I would break open, and from inside me, hundreds of small black living snakes would pour out. The next morning, I was at the bus station at 9 a.m. carrying a small backpack with a few clothes and toiletries. I saw Elena and Camila were already there, along with a man I didn't recognize. He was indigenous, with dark, weathered skin and thick black hair. He was wearing an old jacket and jeans, and he didn't look at us as we spoke. "This is Manuel," Elena introduced. "He says he knows where the village is." "Have you been there?" I asked him. Manuel shook his head. "Never," he said, his voice low and raspy. "But I've heard stories. My grandfather told me about it. He said it's an ancient place, a place where time works differently. He said that those who have been there never really leave." "And you'll take us there?" Camila asked, her voice trembling. Manuel looked at her for the first time, and there was something strange in his eyes, an emptiness, an absence. "I will take you as close as I can," he said. "But I won't go in. No one should go in, but if you must go, you must go alone." "Why would you help us?" I asked, suddenly suspicious. "You don't even know us." Manuel looked at me, and for a moment I thought I saw something move behind his eyes, something slithering and coiling. "I'm not doing this for you," he said. "I'm doing this for my grandfather. He said that if I ever met someone marked by the Lord, I should take them back. It's the only way." "The only way to what?" Elena asked. "The only way to end it," Manuel said simply. We bought tickets for a bus to a small town in the mountains of Chiapas that I had never heard of. The journey took several hours, and during that time none of us spoke much. Manuel sat alone at the back of the bus, looking out the window with a distant expression. Elena and Camilla sat together occasionally, whispering to each other, but mostly silent. I sat alone, feeling the movement inside me, growing stronger with each mile. We arrived in the town late in the afternoon. It was a small place with just one main street, with a few shops and restaurants. Manuel led us to a small inn where we booked rooms for the night. "We'll set out at dawn," he said. "Rest, you'll need it." That night I barely slept. I lay on the bed listening to the insects and feeling the movement inside me. I wondered if I was making a terrible mistake. Was any part of this story real, or were we just chasing a delusion, a nightmare created by Gabriella's traumatized mind? But then I looked down at my arm in the moonlight filtering through the window, and I saw it move. Not the whole arm, but the skin, as if something underneath was slithering. And I knew deep in my heart that it was all real. We set out at dawn, as Manuel had said. He had rented an old Jeep, and we drove up into the mountains on roads that became increasingly worse. After a few hours, the road became too bad for the Jeep to continue, and we left it with a local man who promised to watch it until we returned. "From here we walk," Manuel said. He gave us each a backpack with food, water, and a few other necessary items. He also carried a pistol, which he kept in a small bag tied around his waist. "How far will we go?" Elena asked as we began to climb up the trail. "Not far," Manuel said. 2, maybe 3 hours. "And then?" Camilla asked. "Then you'll see a trail branching off from the main path. It's barely recognizable, covered by trees and moss. You'll follow it, and it will lead you to the village. I won't go with you down that trail. I'll wait for you on the main path for 3 days. If you don't return by the end of the 3rd day, I'll leave and not come back." We walked in silence after that, each of us immersed in our own thoughts. The landscape around us was beautiful, lush green trees, rolling hills, the sounds of birds and insects. But as we climbed higher, the noise began to fade away. Birds stopped singing, insects stopped chirping. The air became colder, and fog began to form around us. "We're getting close," Manuel said after about 2 hours of walking. "Do you feel it? The silence?" I nodded, feeling a sense of dread in my gut, or perhaps it was just the snake moving again. And then suddenly Manuel stopped. "Here," he said, pointing to a small gap between 2 large trees. "That's the trail." I looked in the direction he was pointing, but all I could see were trees and moss. There was no sign of a trail. "I don't see anything," Elena said, echoing my thoughts. "That's why it hasn't been discovered," Manuel said. "It doesn't want to be found, but it's there. And if you're marked by the Lord, it will lead you where you need to go." "And how do we find the Lord?" Camilla asked, her voice small and afraid. "You don't find the Lord," Manuel said, and there was a deep horror in his voice. "The Lord finds you. The Lord always finds you." He gave each of us a small hunting knife. "For self-defense," he explained. "Not against the Lord. Nothing can stand against the Lord. But there might be other things in the forest, things that even the Lord doesn't control." "How will we find our way back?" I asked suddenly, realizing that we would be alone in the forest without a map or guide. "If you are to come back," Manuel said, and I didn't like the way he said, "if," "then the trail will lead you back. It always knows the way." And with those words he turned and began to head back the way we had come. "Wait!" Elena called after him. "Where will you be? How will we find you? I'll wait at the fork, he said without turning back. 3 days, no more. And then he disappeared around a bend in the path, leaving us alone before the invisible trail. Now what? Camilla asked, her voice shaky. Now we go, Elena said, her voice hard with determination. We have no other choice. We have to find the Lord of the Serpents. We have to end this. And with those words, she stepped through the gap between the two trees. At first, it seemed like she would hit a wall of trees and moss, but instead she disappeared as if she had walked through an invisible door. Camilla looked at me, her eyes wide with fear. Are you ready? She asked. I swallowed hard, feeling the snake move inside me. No, I said, but I don't think we have any other choice. And with those words, we stepped through the gap into the mist and toward the village of the Lord of the Serpents. I don't remember much about the journey down the trail. It felt like we walked for hours, though the sun didn't seem to move in the sky. The fog grew thicker as we walked until we could barely see in front of us. There was only the trail beneath our feet, a narrow path of packed earth between trees and moss. And then suddenly the fog cleared, and we found ourselves standing on a hill overlooking a small valley. And in that valley, like a picture from a dark fairy tale, was a village. The houses were built of stone and wood with roofs of thatch and leaves. Smoke rose from a few chimneys, though there was no sign of life on the streets. And in the center of the village, taller than all the other buildings, was a structure that I knew must be the temple, a tall stone building with a wide dome and no windows. That's it, Camilla whispered, her voice filled with dread. That's the village from Gabriella's story. We stood there for a moment, none of us wanting to be the first to go down the hill and into the village, but we had come too far to turn back now. Let's go, Elena finally said, her voice hard with determination. Let's find the Lord of the Serpents. Let's end this. As we descended the hill and into the village, a strange feeling came over me. It was a feeling of being watched, but not just by one person, by hundreds of eyes, thousands of eyes, all observing us from the darkness. The streets were empty, but I could feel the presence of residents hiding behind closed doors and shrouded windows. The air was heavy with the smell of damp earth and burning wood, and there was another odor that I couldn't identify, something sweet and rancid like rotting meat. And then, as we walked through the silent village, I saw them. The snakes. They were everywhere, coiled on rocks, hanging from tree branches, slithering along the ground. They were of all colors and sizes, from small green ones to large black ones as thick as my arm. But the strangest thing was that they didn't seem afraid of us. They didn't even seem to notice us. They just went about their business as if we weren't even there. Where should we go? Camilla asked, her voice small and afraid. The temple, Elena said, pointing to the tallest structure in the village. That's where they took Javier. That's where the Lord will be. As we walked toward the temple, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I could feel the pressure of countless pairs of eyes all focused on us. But the streets remained empty and no one appeared to block our path. And then, as we reached the temple, I understood why. Because standing before the steps leading up to the doorless entrance were a group of about a dozen people, men and women, old and young, all dressed in simple clothes of rough cloth and leather. And on the face of each of them, I saw the same expression, an emptiness, an absence, as if they weren't fully present. "We've been waiting for you," one of them said, an old man with white hair and milky, clouded eyes. "The Lord told us you would come." "We've come to see the Lord of the Serpents," Elena said, her voice hard, though I could see her hands were trembling. "We've come to end this." The old man smiled a smile that didn't reach his cloudy eyes. "Yes," he said, "the Lord knows. The Lord always knows. Come, the Lord is waiting." He turned and began to climb the steps, the others in the group dispersing, to clear a path for us. Elena looked at me and Camilla, a question in her eyes. We both nodded. We had come too far to turn back now. We followed the old man up the steps and into the temple. Inside it was dark and cool with stone walls and an earth floor. The air was heavy with the scent of incense, and another smell, a smell that I recognized as blood. The old man led us through a long hallway and into a large room. It was a circular space with a high domed ceiling and no windows. Light came from hundreds of candles placed in niches on the walls and on the floor. And in the center of the room on a stone pedestal was something that I initially thought was a statue, but then it moved. It slowly turned toward us, and I realized that it wasn't a statue. It was a creature, a thing made of snakes, hundreds, perhaps thousands of snakes, all coiled and intertwined to form the shape of a man. Where there should have been eyes, there were dark, bottomless hollows. Where there should have been a mouth, there was a black void from which occasionally flicked red tongues. It was the Lord of the Serpents. And as it looked at us, I felt a chill run down my spine. "You have come," a voice sounded not from the creature, but from the air around us, as if the room itself was speaking. "You have come to find me." "We've come to end this," Elena said, her voice trembling. "We've come for release." "Release?" the voice asked, and there was a note of amusement in it. "There is no release, only sacrifice, only continuation." "We don't understand," Camilla said, her voice small and afraid. "Of course you don't understand," the voice said, and there was a note of amusement in it. "How could you? You are small creatures, limited creatures. You see the world through your tiny eyes and think you understand it. But you don't understand. You can't understand." The creature on the pedestal moved, snakes sliding and coiling as it changed shape. Now it looked like a woman with long hair made of thin black snakes. "I have been here since before you had a name for me," the voice continued. "I have been here since before there were humans. I will be here long after you have disappeared. I am the ancient, the unchanging, the eternal." "We don't care who you are," Elena said, her voice stronger now. "We just want you to leave us alone. Leave Gabriella's daughters alone." "The daughters?" the voice asked, and again there was a note of amusement. "Isabella's daughters are mine, just as Isabella was mine, just as Miguel was mine. They have eaten of me, and now they belong to me." "No!" Camilla cried out, tears streaming down her face. "They're just children they didn't know." "Knowing changes nothing," the voice said. "Knowing does not change what is. They have eaten their father who killed one of my children, and in doing so they have become a part of me. Just as you who have heard the story, who have dreamed of me, who carry my children within you, have become a part of me." I felt a movement in my stomach, stronger now, almost painful. The snake inside me was moving, responding to the presence of the Lord. "What will happen to us?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What happened to Isabella?" the voice said. "What happens to all who carry my children? You will break open, and from within you my children will emerge, and in that way I will continue. In that way I will spread." "We won't let that happen," Elena said, and I saw she was gripping tightly the knife that Manuel had given her. "We'll end you." "End me?" the voice asked, and there was a note of genuine anger now. "You cannot end me. I am immortal. I am eternal. I am the ancient and the yet to come." "Maybe we can't kill you," Elena said, her voice stronger now, "but we can stop you from spreading. We can stop you from taking any more from our family." "And how do you propose to do that?" the voice asked, and there was a note of challenge in it. "By making a deal," Elena said, her voice steady. "A bargain." "A bargain?" the voice asked, and there was a note of curiosity in it. "Humans always want a bargain. You always think you can negotiate with what you don't understand. But speak. What is your proposal?" "Release Gabriella's daughters," Elena said. "Release them, and in return we'll stay, all three of us, voluntarily." "Elena!" Camilla exclaimed, turning to look at her sister with horror. "What are you talking about? We can't stay here." "We have to," Elena said, not looking at Camilla. "It's the only way. Manuel said so. The only way to end it." "Interesting," the voice said, and there was a note of genuine pleasure.
You would sacrifice yourselves to save the children. A voluntary sacrifice, rare, truly rare. Will you accept it? Elena asked. There was a long moment of silence. The creature on the pedestal stood still, the snakes in it, moving slow and deliberate. I will accept it, the voice finally said. A voluntary sacrifice has greater power than a reluctant one, and 3 souls in exchange for 2, a good bargain. No, I said, stepping forward. Not 3, 1. Me, the voice asked, and there was a note of surprise in it. I will stay, I said, my voice steady despite my pounding heart. Just me. Free Gabriella's daughters, and Elena and Camila too. Let them go, and I'll stay. No.
Elena and Camila exclaimed in unison. Why? The voice asked, ignoring their protest. Why would one be of greater value than 3? Because I'm volunteering, I said. Because I'm choosing this not because I have to, but because I want to. Because I'm sacrificing myself not out of fear, but out of love. Love, the voice asked, and there was a note of confusion in it. Love for children you don't even know, for relatives you've barely met. Yes, I said. And love for something greater than myself, something I can't fully understand but can feel. Like you said, I'm a small creature with limited understanding, but I can feel the weight of this, the importance. I can feel the connection between all of us, between me and Gabriella and Javier and the girls and even you, and I'm willing to give myself up for that connection. Alex, no, Elena cried, grabbing my arm. You can't do this. I have to, I said, not looking at her. It's the only way. You would truly give yourself willingly, the voice asked, and there was a note of wonder in it, not out of fear but out of love. Yes, I said. But only if you free them all, Gabriella's daughters and Elena and Camila. Let them go, let them live. The creature on the pedestal moved again, changing shape once more. And this time I saw it took the shape of Javier, or at least a simulacrum of Javier made of snakes. A willing sacrifice, the voice said, and it sounded almost reverent. Such power, such potential. Do we have a deal? I asked. We have a deal, the voice said. The children will be free. Your cousins will be free. But you, Alex, you will stay. You will become a part of me as Javier became a part of me, as Gabriella became a part of me. You will join the eternal dance of life and death, of consumption and creation. I felt a shiver run through me, but I nodded. I accept. No, Alex, please, Camila begged, tears streaming down her face. There must be another way. There isn't, I said, finally looking at her. This is the only way to end it, to save the girls, to save you. But what about you? Elena asked, her voice breaking. What will happen to you? I looked at the creature on the pedestal, at the simulacrum of Javier made of intertwined snakes. I'll become a part of something greater, I said, though I didn't fully believe it. Something eternal. Take them away, the voice commanded, and suddenly from the shadows at the edges of the room, figures emerged, men and women with the same empty expression as those who had greeted us outside. They moved toward Elena and Camila. No, Elena shouted, trying to fight them off. We won't leave without Alex. You must, I said. It's the only way. Go. Take care of the girls. Make sure they're safe. Alex, Camila sobbed as they were dragged toward the exit. Please don't do this. It's already done, I said, forcing a smile. Goodbye, cousins. And then they were gone, dragged from the room, their shouts and cries fading as they were taken away. I was alone with the Lord of the Serpents. A brave sacrifice, the voice said. Brave but futile. The girls will never be free of me, nor will your cousins. They have eaten of me, and I am in them as I am in you. I felt a chill. But you said... I said they would be free, the voice interrupted, and they will be, free to leave this place, free to return to their lives. But they will always carry my children within them, and one day when the time is right, my children will emerge, and in that way I will spread. You lied, I said, feeling a surge of anger. You broke our deal. I did not lie, the voice said. I did not break our deal. I merely understood it differently than you did. Such is the nature of bargains between humans and gods. I felt despair wash over me. I had sacrificed myself for nothing. Gabriella's daughters would still suffer. Elena and Camilla would still suffer. All I had done was delay the inevitable. "What will happen to me now?" I asked, my voice hollow. "Now," the voice said, and there was a note of anticipation in it. "You will join us. You will become a part of the eternal dance. You will feed my children as Javier fed my children, as all who come here feed my children." The creature on the pedestal began to change shape again, the snakes coiling and uncoiling, sliding over each other, and as I watched, it took the form of a large, open mouth, a maw made of snakes open and waiting. "Come," the voice said, "join us." I felt my feet move of their own accord, carrying me toward the pedestal, toward the waiting maw. I tried to resist, to step back, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. It was as if I was being pulled by an invisible force, drawing me inexorably toward the creature. And then as I reached the pedestal, the maw opened wider, and I saw inside it not darkness but light, a pulsing, writhing light made of thousands of tiny, gleaming scales. And from within that light, voices whispered to me, thousands of voices all speaking at once, in a language I couldn't understand but somehow knew. They were calling me, welcoming me, inviting me to join them in their eternal dance. I closed my eyes and stepped forward into the maw, into the light, into the chorus of voices. For a moment there was pain, searing, unbearable pain, as if my flesh was being torn apart. And then there was nothing. No pain, no fear, no anger, no despair, just a sense of oneness, of completeness, of being a part of something vast and ancient and eternal. I was no longer Alex. I was a part of the Lord of the Serpents, a note in an eternal symphony, a thread in an infinite tapestry, a scale on an immortal serpent. And I understood in that moment of dissolution and rebirth the true nature of the Lord. Not a god, not a monster, but a cycle of life and death, of consumption and creation, of ending and beginning. A cycle that had existed since the dawn of time and would continue until its end. I understood why Manuel had helped us, why his grandfather had told him to guide those marked by the Lord back to the village, not to save them, but to complete the cycle, to return what had been taken, to maintain the balance. And I understood why the Lord had accepted my sacrifice, not because of its power, but because of its rarity. Few came willingly to the Lord. Few offered themselves freely. Most came in fear and desperation and anger. But I had come in love and acceptance, in surrender. And that made my sacrifice valuable in a way the Lord had rarely experienced. As my consciousness expanded, merging with the thousands of others that made up the Lord, I saw visions of the past, of the present, of the future. I saw Gabriella, her body breaking open, snakes pouring from within her. I saw her daughters carrying the Lord's children within them, waiting for the day they would emerge. I saw Elena and Camilla fleeing the village, returning to their lives, but forever changed, forever marked. And I saw myself, or what remained of myself, becoming a part of the Lord, adding my voice to the chorus, my thread to the tapestry, my scale to the serpent. But even as I merged with the Lord, a part of me remained separate, observing, understanding. And that part knew that the cycle wasn't complete, that the story wasn't over, that Elena and Camilla and Gabriella's daughters were still out there, still carrying the Lord's children within them. And that part of me made a decision. A decision that would change the cycle, alter the balance, rewrite the story. I don't know how long I was in that state of merger and understanding. Time had no meaning within the Lord. It could have been minutes, hours, days, years, but eventually I became aware of a change, a separation, a pulling apart. I was being reformed, remade, not as Alex, not fully, but as something else, something new, something that was both Alex and the Lord and neither. I opened my eyes, or what passed for eyes in my new form, and found myself in a small, dark room within the temple. I was lying on a stone slab, naked, my skin glistening with a thin layer of mucus. and when I looked down at myself, I saw that my skin was moving, rippling, as if something was slithering beneath it. I sat up feeling strangely light, as if I could float away at any moment. My head was clearer than it had ever been. I could remember everything, my life as Alex, my time within the Lord, and everything in between. I understood now, truly understood what the Lord was, what I was, what all of this meant, and I knew what I had to do. I stood up, finding clothes laid out for me beside the slab, simple clothes of rough cloth and leather like those worn by the villagers. I put them on, feeling the strange sensation of my skin moving beneath them, of the Lord's children slithering within me. As I dressed, a figure entered the room, the old man with the white hair and cloudy eyes who had greeted us at the temple. "You are ready," he said, not a question, but a statement. "Yes," I replied, my voice sounding strange to my ears, both my own and not my own. "The Lord has chosen you," the old man said. "Few are chosen, few are remade. You are blessed." "I am chosen," I agreed, "but not for the reason you think." The old man looked confused, his cloudy eyes narrowing. "What do you mean?" "The Lord has chosen me to complete the cycle," I said, "but not in the way you expect." "Not in the way it has always been completed." "I don't understand," the old man said. "You don't need to," I replied. "You only need to show me the way out. I have work to do." The old man hesitated, then nodded. "Follow me." He led me through the temple, through corridors and rooms I hadn't seen before, until we reached a door hidden behind a hanging tapestry. Beyond the door was a tunnel, dark and damp, that led down beneath the temple, beneath the village. "This will take you to the edge of the forest," the old man said. "But why would you leave? You have been chosen. You have been blessed." "I have been chosen," I agreed, "but not to stay, to go, to complete the cycle in a new way." The old man looked troubled, but he didn't try to stop me. Perhaps he couldn't. Perhaps the Lord wouldn't let him. "May the Lord guide your path," he said as I stepped into the tunnel. "The Lord is my path," I replied, "and I am the Lord's." And with those words I descended into the darkness, leaving the temple, the village, and all that had been behind me. The tunnel was long and winding, but I didn't feel tired or afraid. I could see in the dark now a gift from the Lord. I could feel the earth around me, the creatures within it, the life pulsing through it all. I was connected to it all, a part of the great web of existence in a way I had never been before. When I finally emerged from the tunnel, I found myself at the edge of the forest, just as the old man had said. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool forest air. And then I began to walk, following a path only I could see, guided by a knowledge only I could understand. I was going to find Elena and Camila. I was going to find Gabriella's daughters. I was going to complete the cycle, but not in the way the Lord expected, not in the way it had always been completed. I was going to change the story. I was going to rewrite the ending. I was going to set them free, truly free, not just from the village, not just from the physical presence of the Lord, but from the Lord's children within them, from the cycle itself, because I had seen the truth within the Lord. I had seen the cycle for what it was, not a necessity, not a natural law, but a choice. A choice made long ago by beings who had forgotten that it was a choice. And now, with the understanding granted to me by my time within the Lord, I could make a different choice. I could break the cycle. I could end the Lord's reign. It wouldn't be easy. The Lord was ancient, powerful, deeply rooted in the world. And a part of the Lord was now within me, just as it was within Elena, within Camila, within Gabriella's daughters. But that was also my strength. Because I carried the Lord within me, I understood the Lord. I knew its weaknesses, its fears, its limitations, and I knew how to end it. As I walked through the forest, away from the village and toward the world beyond, I felt the snakes within me moving, coiling, slithering. They were restless, anxious, perhaps sensing my intentions, but they couldn't stop me. They were a part of me now, but I wasn't just a vessel for them. I was something new, something unexpected, something the Lord had never encountered before. Night fell, but I continued walking my new vision, allowing me to navigate the darkness with ease. I had no need for rest, for food, for water. The Lord's essence sustained me even as I plotted its downfall. By dawn, I had reached the spot where Manuel had shown us the hidden trail. He was gone, of course. The 3 days had passed, and just as he had said, he had left and not returned. I didn't need him anyway. I knew the way now. I knew all the ways. I continued on down the mountain through the small town, onto a bus headed for Mexico City. The other passengers didn't look at me, didn't notice anything strange about me. To them, I was just another traveler, another face in the crowd. They couldn't see the snakes moving beneath my skin. They couldn't hear the chorus of voices whispering in my mind. I reached Mexico City late the next day. I didn't know where Elena and Camila were, but I didn't need to. I could feel them. I could sense the Lord's children within them, calling to the children within me. They were like beacons in the night, guiding me to them. I found them in an apartment in the Condesa neighborhood, the same apartment where Camila had shown me Gabriella's diary. They were together, huddled on the couch, speaking in low, frightened voices. They didn't hear me approach. They didn't know I was there until I knocked on the door. Camila opened it, and when she saw me, her eyes widened with shock and fear. "Alex," she whispered as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "Hello, Camila," I said, my voice still sounding strange to my ears. "May I come in?" She hesitated, her hand trembling on the door handle. But then she nodded, stepping back to let me enter. Elena was on the couch, and when she saw me, she jumped to her feet. "Alex, how we thought you were dead," I finished for her. "In a way, I was. But now I'm something else, something new." "What happened to you?" Camila asked, her voice trembling. "How did you escape?" "I didn't escape," I said. "I was released, chosen, remade." "By the Lord of the Serpents?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. "I am a part of the Lord now, and the Lord is a part of me. But I am not just a vessel, not just a host. I am something more, something the Lord didn't expect." "What do you want?" Camila asked, backing away from me toward her sister. "I want to help you," I said. "I want to free you, truly free you. Not just from the village, not just from the physical presence of the Lord, but from the Lord's children within you, from the cycle itself." "Is that possible?" Elena asked, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Yes," I said. "With what I know now, with what I am now, it's possible, but it won't be easy, and it won't be painless." "And Gabriella's daughters?" Camila asked. "Can you help them too?" "Yes," I said. "That's why I'm here, to help all of you, to end this once and for all." "What do we need to do?" Elena asked. "You need to trust me," I said. "And you need to be brave, braver than you've ever been before. Because what I'm going to do, what we're going to do, has never been done before. It will change everything. It will rewrite the story." "We trust you," Camila said, though her voice still trembled. "We'll do whatever it takes." I nodded, feeling a surge of something that might have been hope, or might have been determination, or might have been something entirely new, something that had no name in human language. "Then let's begin," I said. "Let's end the reign of the Lord of the Serpents. Let's break the cycle once and for all." And as I spoke those words, I felt the snakes within me stir, as if sensing the danger, the threat to their existence. But they couldn't stop me. Nothing could stop me now. I had seen the truth within the Lord, and that truth had set me free. And now I would use that freedom to free others, to end the Lord's reign, to rewrite the story. The Lord of the Serpents had made a mistake when it chose me, when it remade me, when it shared its essence, its understanding, its power with me, because in doing so it had given me the tools to destroy it, to end the cycle, to bring about a new beginning, a beginning where no one would have to fear the snakes beneath their skin, where no one would have to dread the breaking open, the emergence of the Lord's children, where no one would have to sacrifice themselves to feed an ancient immortal hunger, a beginning where the Lord of the Serpents would be nothing more than a story, a legend, a cautionary tale told around campfires to frighten children, But to reach that beginning, we would have to pass through an ending that would be painful, terrifying, transformative, an ending that would test us to our limits and beyond, an ending that was just about to begin. 3 days later, we were in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Mexico City. Gabriella's daughters were with us, brought by Elena's mother, who had been caring for them since Gabriella's death. The girls looked pale and frightened, especially the older one, Lucia, who kept clutching her stomach and whimpering. "It's getting worse," Elena's mother said, her voice tight with worry. "Last night, Lucia vomited up something that moved. I tried to catch it, but it disappeared under the bed, just like Gabriella said." I nodded, feeling the writhing beneath my own skin intensify. "It's time, then. We need to begin." I had spent the past 3 days preparing. Using the knowledge I had gained from my merger with the Lord of the Serpents, I had gathered what we needed herbs from deep in the mountains, ancient symbols drawn with ash and clay, and a ritual that had not been performed in thousands of years. "What exactly are we doing?" Camilla asked, her voice shaking as she watched me arrange candles in a complex pattern on the concrete floor. "Breaking the cycle," I replied, my voice oddly calm even to my own ears. "The Lord of the Serpents feeds on sacrifice. It consumes, it transforms, it spreads. But there's a weakness in the cycle, a vulnerability I discovered when I was within the Lord." "What weakness?" Elena pressed, holding the younger daughter who had begun to cry softly. "The Lord can only spread through consumption," I explained. "Through eating, through taking into oneself. That's why it made Gabriella eat Javier's flesh. That's why it's inside all of us now, because we've all consumed a part of it, whether knowingly or not." "So how do we break that?" Camilla asked. I finished the pattern and stood up, feeling the creatures inside me slither in protest. "By reversing the flow, by giving back what was taken, by sacrifice of a different kind." The ritual was complex, and I won't describe it in detail. Some knowledge should remain hidden, forgotten. But it involved blood, my blood, Elena's blood, Camilla's blood, and a single drop from each of Gabriella's daughters. It involved words that no human tongue was meant to speak, syllables that twisted in the air like living things. And it involved pain, so much pain. As the ritual reached its climax, I felt the snakes within me grow frantic, thrashing beneath my skin, trying to escape. I could see the same happening to Elena and Camilla, their skin rippling and bulging as if something was trying to break free. The girls screamed, Lucia clutching her stomach as something moved visibly beneath her shirt. Her mother held her tears streaming down her face, whispering prayers and reassurances that sounded hollow in the echoing warehouse. "It's working!" I gasped through gritted teeth as a particularly violent movement sent me to my knees. "Hold on, just a little longer." And then abruptly it stopped. The writhing beneath my skin ceased. The bulging in Elena and Camilla subsided. The girls stopped screaming, looking around in confusion and relief. Is it over?" Camilla asked, her voice hoarse. I slowly got to my feet, feeling strangely empty, hollow. The constant presence I had felt since merging with the Lord was gone, leaving behind a silence that was both welcome and unsettling. "Yes," I said, "it's over. The cycle is broken." "The Lord's influence is gone." Elena's mother sobbed with relief, clutching the girls to her. "Thank God," she whispered. "Thank God." But I couldn't share in their relief, because I knew something they didn't. Something I had learned during my time within the Lord of the Serpents, something I hadn't told them. The Lord couldn't be destroyed. Not completely. It was too ancient, too powerful, too deeply rooted in the world. The cycle couldn't be broken, only redirected. I had freed them, yes. The Lord's children were no longer within them, no longer threatening to burst forth and consume them from within. But those children hadn't been destroyed. They had merely been transferred, redirected, into me. I could feel them now, all of them writhing and coiling within me. Not just the few that had been placed there during my merger with the Lord, but all of them. Every snake that had been inside Elena, inside Camilla, inside Gabriella's daughters. They were all inside me now, making me their new host, their new vessel, their new Lord. "You should go," I said, my voice strained as I fought to contain the seething mass within me. All of you, go home, live your lives. Forget about the village, about the Lord of the Serpents. Forget about me. Alex, what's wrong? Elena asked, stepping toward me with concern. You don't look well. I'm fine, I lied, just tired. The ritual took a lot out of me. I need to rest. We're not leaving you, Camilla insisted. Not after everything you've done for us. I looked at her, feeling a surge of something that might have been affection or might have been hunger. I wasn't sure anymore. The boundaries were blurring. You have to, I said. For your own safety, for everyone's safety. What are you talking about? Elena demanded. Alex, you're scaring me. I closed my eyes, feeling the writhing within me intensify. I was losing control, losing myself, becoming something else. Something ancient and hungry and endless. Go, I repeated, my voice dropping to a whisper. Please, while you still can. They must have seen something in my face, some glimpse of the transformation taking place within me, because Elena's mother suddenly grabbed the girls and backed toward the door. We should do as he says, she urged, pulling the reluctant Camilla along with her. Come on, now. Elena hesitated, looking at me with a mixture of fear and sorrow. Alex. Go, I said one last time, feeling my skin begin to ripple and shift. Live. They left, finally the door of the warehouse slamming shut behind them. And then I was alone. Alone with the countless serpents that writhed within me, that were becoming me, that were remaking me into something new and ancient and terrible. I fell to my knees, my body convulsing as the transformation accelerated. My skin stretched and tore, revealing not blood and muscle beneath, but scales and coils. I was breaking open just as Gabriella had broken open, but what emerged from me was not death, but a new kind of life. I don't know how long the transformation took. Time had no meaning in that state of agony and ecstasy of ending and beginning. But when it was over, when the pain subsided and the world came back into focus, I was no longer Alex. Not entirely. I was the Lord of the Serpents now. Or perhaps more accurately, I was a Lord of the Serpents, a new branch of an ancient tree, a new current in an eternal river. I stood up, my new body moving with a fluid grace that my human form had never possessed. I looked down at myself, at the intricate pattern of scales that covered me, at the way my flesh could shift and flow like water, like thousands of tiny serpents moving in perfect harmony. I was beautiful. I was terrible. I was eternal, and I was hungry. The ritual had freed Elena, Camila, and Gabriella's daughters, yes, but it had not ended the cycle. It had merely changed it, redirected it. The Lord of the Serpents still needed to feed, to consume, to spread, and now that hunger was mine. I left the warehouse that night, moving through the shadows of Mexico City like a ghost, like a nightmare, like a god. I had work to do. I had a cycle to maintain. I had a hunger to satisfy. 3 months later, Elena received a package at her apartment. Inside was a small wooden box, intricately carved with symbols she didn't recognize, but somehow understood. And within the box, nestled on a bed of dried flowers and herbs, was a meat pie. There was a note with it written in a handwriting that was both familiar and strange. For you, cousin, a gift, a reminder, a promise. The Lord of the Serpents never forgives, and it never forgets. Elena stared at the meat pie, feeling a strange hunger awaken within her. A hunger she hadn't felt since that day in the warehouse. A hunger that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her, from a place that should have been empty but somehow wasn't. And as she reached for the pie, her hand trembling, she felt something move beneath her skin. Something small and cold and alive. Something that had been waiting all this time, dormant but not gone, hidden but not destroyed. The cycle continues. It always continues. And somewhere in the night I watch and wait, knowing that soon, very soon, Elena and Camilla and even Gabriella's daughters will join me. Not as sacrifices this time, but as equals. As brothers and sisters in scale and fang. As lords of their own domains, spreading our influence, our essence, our hunger throughout the world. The Lord of the Serpents never dies. It only changes form. And the feast has only just begun.